essentially, yeah, we started this book club as a means to kind of raise racial literacy within the institution, and create a kind of shared space for confidential learning. So thank you for Jenny and Lucy for supporting with it, and thank you to Laurence for offering today. So the book that we're called Leopold Ghost. We're going to record the talk, but we won't record the discussion section. So yeah, so Laurence is an independent researcher and historian who also runs the Liverpool Black History Research Group. He's also a National Museums Liverpool's historian in residence, and works closely with the University of Liverpool. So Laurence is going to provide a bit of context around the book, and he's also going to talk a little bit about how kind of King Leopold's involvement in the Congo, we kind of see those legacies of colonialism and slavery today. So yeah, so I'll let Laurence with the talk, and then we can have lunch and then discuss the book before we all come on.
Thanks, Leah. Hello, everyone. Say any more because yeah, I just wanted to kind of contextualize some of the history that goes into Liverpool becoming very important in the history of the Congo, the history of West Africa more broadly, and also the Americas. I'm going to focus primarily on West Africa because of our connections with this institution's connection to that part as well. I think it's really important to kind of understand why Liverpool, the home of the oldest school of tropical medicine country, and still very specific reason. And this is a history that goes back more than 200 years prior to the establishment of this institution, but it was very much the connections that were laid down during the early colonial period, which are responsible for Liverpool being the home, as I say, the first tropical school of medicine in the country. So where do I begin? Well, I begin right back in the medieval period, because I think it's really important to understand how Liverpool develops. Liverpool is not an ancient place, although we, commemorated our 800th anniversary in the year 2007. Liverpool really doesn't become a significant place until the beginning of the 18th century. It's very much with the beginnings of empire in Britain that Liverpool becomes an important location in the book forward. So much so that the head of history, Ramsey Muir, published a book in 1907 to commemorate the 700th anniversary of Liverpool receiving that charter from King John, which established it, which put it on the map. And in there he writes, beyond the doubt of the slave trade that raised Liverpool from a struggling port to be one of the richest and most prosperous trading centres of the world. 1207 received that charter from King John. For almost half a millennia, Liverpool remains no more than a sleepy fishing village. It's a hamlet. In 1650, just after King Charles has lost his head, Liverpool's population is over about 1,200. Even at the beginning of the 18th century, Liverpool has now become large enough to become a distinct parish, but it's still a pretty insignificant place. Population is about 5,000 people, and that makes it about. It still puts it behind places like Wigan, as one of the smallest conurbations in the northwest of England. But now we're a significant parish. But it would really be during the 18th century that Liverpool would begin its great rise. Population, as I say, at the beginning of the century, about 5,000 people. By the end of the century, it's 80,000 people. Now, that might not sound like a large figure to you and I today, but at that time, that made Liverpool the second largest conurbation in the country. Just a 100-year period, gone from a pretty insignificant place, which is barely a parish, to the second most populous place in the nation. And that was primarily off the back of trade. Now, the East Indian Company had the monopoly of trade with both India and China. India writes until 1830, and China writes until 1833. This precluded the Liverpool merchant from getting involved in that lucrative trade. So we very much focused our eyes on the Americas. The Americas initially trade in the goods that enslaved people produced: sugar, tobacco, spices, etc. Once the Royal African Company uses its monopoly of trade with West Africa, Liverpool merchants are in there immediately. 1698, that trade ends, and the first legal slave ship leaves Liverpool in that year. We have been involved. There is some evidence that we're involved in the illegal trade prior to that date, but it's really from about the last part of, or the last couple of years of the 17th century that Liverpool merchants begin to trade directly with West Africa. It's documented from then onwards. Liverpool, by the 1740s, would dominate slave trade. And it would really be the trade in enslaved Africans and the goods that they produced that would be the great catalyst for Liverpool becoming the great gateway to the British Empire. By the end of the slave trade in 1807, Liverpool merchants have transported almost 1.5 million people into slavery and ultimately premature death in the Americas. Now, this is a significant figure because London had been involved in the slave trade 100 years before Liverpool, Bristol at least 50 years before, but by the end of the slave trade, Liverpool had transported just slightly more than London and Bristol combined. So in a much shorter period, the Liverpool merchants transported far more people. At least 5,000 slaving voyagers left Liverpool. And that's just during the legal period. We know Liverpool was still fitting out slave ships as late as the 1860s. Now, when the slave trade ended, Liverpool merchants did not give up their links with West Africa. Those merchants, in fact, the very same merchants who captained slave ships and ultimately ended up owning slave ships, they continued to trade with West Africa. After the slave trade was abolished, it was primarily in what was known as legitimate goods. So these were agricultural goods, most notably palm oil. Palm oil was the lubricant of the Industrial Revolution. So when we think of mineral oils now as being used to lubricate machinery, back in the 19th century, it was natural oils and it was primarily palm oil. Palm oil was used to lubricate the locomotives that ran on the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, which was also founded by slave trading merchants. It was used to lubricate the engines that were powering the mills that were producing all this slave-produced cotton textile. That's not what we counted that. And also, it would then be used to kind of clean up the workers. So obviously, we associate the Industrial Revolution with soot and grime, etc. Palm oil would be the main fat used for the production of soap. And again, Liverpool and the area around it dominated the soap industry. Obviously, we think so much of William Lieber over at Port Sunlight, who would then go on to become a major benefactor for LSTM. Off the back of this trade as well, there's lots of other ancillary trades that we don't necessarily associate with the trade, the trade in enslaved people and goods that they produce. But the chemical industry, which is also has a centre in Cheshire and Merseyside, that was to produce alkalis. Those alkalis were used to make many of the soaps that I mentioned in relation to palm oil. So we've got all these other disconnected but connected trades, and that's what really during the 19th century leads on to Liverpool becoming the centre of the palm oil trade. Now, the Elder Dempster shipping line, which would be so responsible for dominating trade between Liverpool and West Africa, and also the African Steamship Company. These would be two of the main carriers of West African palm oil. Again, West African palm oil, again, I have to mention this. The legacy of that trade comes from slavery and the slave trade. Again, palm oil was used to feed many of the enslaved on their voyages over to plantations in the Americas. And many of the West African slave traders who Liverpool merchant bought enslaved from, they also traded in palm. And the Tobin and Horsfall families were two families who were very deeply connected to the slave trade. These also went on to be two of the main importers of West African palm oil. They did not give up their connections with West Africa. They simply stopped trading in enslaved people and started to trade in the goods that enslaved people produced in West Africa. Because ironically, West African palm oil primarily harvested by enslaved people on plantations in West Africa directly. And as I say, that trade continued throughout the 19th century, long after the slave trade had been abolished. And that is how we end up becoming the centre of palm oil trade. Now, Liverpool, by the beginning of the 20th century, coming back to population figures, the population of the town is almost about 750,000 people. So, if you think between 1700 and 1900, the population goes from about 5,000 people to about 750,000 people. The largest population figures taken in Liverpool were in the 1931 census, when the population was about 950,000 people. So Liverpool as a city now, in terms of its population, is about half the size that it was in the 1930s. Again, I make the connection between the dismantling of the British Empire and the decline of Liverpool as a major port. So if you think about it, between 1931 and 1981, you lose half our population. Think about the British Empire. These are really the decades where Britain gives us more. Has begun to dismantle its empire by 1981. We only have the true colony on everything else has gone. That's the year of Liverpool's Nigeria. Population at its lowest, and that's the year of Toxic riots, and ultimately one will probably lead to the Renaissance city as well. The events that take place in that year lead to Liverpool's, growth again. And thankfully, many of our students have stayed. Mentioning students makes it very easy for me to move on to the next point that I want to make, which is to kind of highlight how philanthropy around medicine, science, and education in Liverpool is financed primarily by merchants who were traders, Indian slaves. So let's look at some of our institutions. So the first infirmary in Liverpool, which was founded in 1749, more than 50% of the merchants who financed that institution were merchants who were involved in the slave trade. Again, in those days, there was no National Health Service. The state did not provide you with hospitals. If you went to the hospital, it was down to the wealthy merchants in the town to provide that, and the Liverpool merchants did exactly that. 1749 it was founded, but throughout its history, it would be financed primarily by merchants who were involved in the slave trade. Even the teaching of medicine as an academic subject in Liverpool is connected to slavery. The Dolben Act of 1798 leads to academic accreditation being needed to work on board slave ships. And that the first academic exams around medicine in Liverpool are taking place to provide people with licenses to go and work on board slave ships. Ultimately, this would lead to Liverpool becoming a teaching hospital with the establishment of the medical school in 1844. Now, the medical school comes out of Liverpool's first higher educational institution, which was the Royal Institution. It was founded in 1817. And my group, Liverpool Black History Research Group, had just done quite an in-depth research project that was going to come up with the fact that more than 65% of the merchants who financed the establishment of that institution were merchants involved in the slave economy, either as former slave traders or the traders of goods that the slave produced, or as plantation owners. Now, the Liverpool Royal Institution was the forerunner of the University of Liverpool. And back in 2017, we held a celebration at the university to, the bicentenary of the founding of the Royal Institution. Out of the Royal Institution not only comes the medical school, but also the Liverpool Mechanics Institution, which is the forerunner of John Moore's University. The two main benefactors behind the establishment of what is now John Moore's was a man called John Gladstone, for Prime Minister, and also Benjamin Arthur Hayward, who came from the Liverpool slave trade minister, who then became bankers. Banking again, many of Liverpool's most important philanthropists, bankers. The 14 important Liverpool banks listed after 1750, 10 of them were founded by Liverpool slave trade merchants. So you can kind of see how philanthropy in Liverpool is directly connected to wealth created through the exploitation of Africa and Africans most directly. Now, this institution is simply one of the final institutions in the city to have been founded by merchants who engaged in trade in West Africa and ultimately the exploitation of Africans themselves. As I say, throughout the 19th century, it was dominated palm oil trade, and Elder Dempster was the most important of the slave traders, of the shipping companies who were trading with West Africa. It was founded in the 1860s. Eventually, Alfred Lewis Jones becomes the head of that institution, of that organization, although he starts off as just a minor clerk. But this was the beginning of the Nouveau Riche, where people from not particularly affluent backgrounds could become very wealthy and powerful, and he did that directly through the trade with West Africa. Now, again, so much of our philanthropy, going back to this earlier period, came out based on merchants who trading with this part of the world, and it's exactly the same in the case of LSTR. We could continue the conversation now, or we could get into the discussions around the book. It's up to you. I'm going to kind of around because I've got lots of bits and bobs that I want to kind of talk about. But I'll give you a couple of other little interesting bits and bobs before we go forward and discuss the book. This is a really interesting book, which was written in the 70s, called Bankers of West Africa. Now, for me, one of the links that we don't necessarily talk about is how Liverpool merchants were so involved in establishing banking in West Africa, and no one more so than Alfred Lewis Jones. If I was to ask you where the Bank of France had its headquarters, you'd probably think Paris. If I was to say the Bank of America, you'd probably think New York or Washington. Bank of Ireland, Dublin. When we talk about the Bank of West Africa, Havergast River had its headquarters. Exactly. It was founded by Alfred Lewis Jones and had its headquarters here in Liverpool. It's a beautiful building. Does everyone know Oh Me Oh My, as it's called now? West Africa House. That was built as the headquarters of the Bank of West Africa. As I say, Bank of West Africa is now known as the Bank of Nigeria. Has disappeared. It's just morphed into another institution. And for me, this is a really important connection again between this history and the legacies that are still with us today. Now, interestingly, I do think Alfred Lewis Jones also made that connection between slavery and the wealth that merchants were making in Liverpool from their trade to West Africa, right at the beginning of the 20th century. In 1907, he had a book produced. I shouldn't say produced, I should say reprinted, which was a Dutch book. It's called A New and Accurate Description of the Coast of Guinea. And he had it reprinted in 1907. And he says in there the reason for it was the object of showing the merchants of the present day what was done 200 years ago by the enterprising people of those days. And we all know what those enterprising people were trading in. They were trading primarily in enslaved people themselves. So for me, this is a really interesting and important way of kind of highlighting that wealth that's accrued through slavery continue to develop the infrastructure that merchants would benefit from right up to the beginning of the 20th century. Slavery helped to develop Liverpool, taking it from what was a struggling seaport to one of the richest, the most prosperous trading centres of the world. Throughout that period, we had many institutions and organisations that were established and continue to stay, and LSTM was simply one of those institutions. I'm now going to open it up. If you guys want to talk about what you've got any questions, I'm very happy to kind of answer any questions that you may have.